Greetings. How are you all doing? Thank you for joining us on this rainy day, depending on where you are. But we're in Georgia while there's a hurricane outside or headed this way. What we do know is that we are inside warm and safe. And I pray that each and every one of you are doing well. My name is LaTosha Brown. I am co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund and the visionary founder of Southern Black Girls and Women's Consortium. Yeah, I'm your host for tonight's event. We're going to celebrate the power of our stories and the freedom to tell them. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. And so what we know is that literally being our words, like literally being able to tell our story, that's our light into the world. And so we're so happy to have each and every one of you all. You know, as many of you know, that in the state of Georgia, where I am right now, where this event was to take place, there are many attacks on our freedom, you know, that we attacks literally around what we read, the freedom to learn, the freedom to have the books that we desire, and they've been escalating. Just recently in the state of Georgia, what we know is that the AP course for African American history has now been deemed that it's not credentialed, that ultimately that it has been separated from American history in such a way that the students will not get credit for taking AP history, African American history, and there's an ongoing fight around that. And so what we know is that while those things are happening, tonight we've decided that we're going to celebrate the stories that have changed our world, even with some of the people that are doing everything to prevent this change from happening. We're standing as a light into the world, and we're going to illuminate our light through our stories. You know, books not only bear witness to our humanity, but they actively claim and that we have to fight for our stories because they literally are the embodiment of our humanity. And I often say that while I'm known for doing a lot of work around voting rights and democracy, that ultimately I don't think it will be our politics to save us. It will be our humanity. And so with that, I am joining One World on this night for our Banned Books event. We're going to amplify our voices. We're going to shape the narrative, and we're going to build the future that we envision. Now, I've already seen some shout outs. I've been watching where people are from, but I'm just going to do a shout out right now. Like literally, if you can do a shout out, if you are a teacher, an educator, let us know. Put something in the chat so we know that you're there. If you are a librarian, make sure that you're putting something in the chat. We see you, something in the chat that you're there. I see you, teacher from South Carolina. If you are a youth organizer, or if you work with young people. And so how about this? If you are a lover of books, if you are a writer, if you are a creative, shout out. We just want to lift up that we are the griots of our time, you all, that we want to make sure that we're connected, that as storytellers, we understand how important our role is in the world, that we actually help shape the way that shaping the perspective of giving people permission to actually stand in their humanity, shaping how we see the world, like giving people permission to expand their imaginations in the world. And so that's why we're so happy for this event tonight. And so now I'm going to introduce Chris Jackson, who is One World publisher, and he's also the editor-in-chief, and Elizabeth Mendez-Berry, who's the vice president and executive editor, to talk about the inspiration for tonight's event. And then I'll join you back.
Thank you so much, LaTosha. It is such an honor to have you as our host tonight. And thank you everybody for joining us. We were so excited to see you in person at the King Chapel, and we're, of course, disappointed that we don't get to be together in the flesh, but we're really grateful that you've joined us online. And as LaTosha said, we really hope that you and yours are safe in this weather. So one of the reasons that gathering is so important to us at One World is because we think about publishing as building community. Our books are invitations to connect through stories and ideas. Without readers, ideas don't migrate. Without readers, ideas can't be watered, they can't grow. So tonight we celebrate the stories that bring us together and the readers that keep them alive. One of the writers that I work with, Rashad Robinson of Color of Change, talks often about the quiet power of infrastructure, the behind the scenes resources and relationships that enable change to happen. The infrastructure of storytelling is publishers, it's libraries, it's bookstores, it's classrooms, it's book talk, and it's people. It's you here tonight. You're a vital part of the infrastructure. Not only are you readers and writers, as we just heard, your organizers, your students, your librarians, your educators, your parents. It is that invisible web that enables books to reach readers and that protects them when they are under attack. Thank you for being our web. I'm going to pass the mic now to my colleague, Chris Jackson, who has the honor of having edited and published some of the most beloved and banned books of our time. Take it away, Chris.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I just wanted to quickly, for those of you who don't know, just a quick little summary of who One World is and why we're doing this event tonight. And I'll be very quick because, as always, we want to give the mic to our writers as quickly as possible. But One World was founded in the early 1990s as a home to literature of all kinds, books that hadn't found much of a home in the rest of publishing. It was eventually phased out as an imprint, but we phased it back in 2017 when we relaunched it with Ta-Nehisi Coates' last work of nonfiction. We were 8 years in power. Our mission from the beginning was not to find small books or obscure books, but to find excellent and necessary works that brought to life stories that the rest of publishing had not told or told well. Over the last decade, we've published essential work on climate, on the recent history of homicide and the drug war, the deep history of voting rights. We've told the stories of the undocumented. We've done books on art and disability, a book about coming of age in South Africa by Trevor Noah, and a book about coming of age in Palestine by Ahed Tamimi, and published landmark works on race and justice, like those by the writers you'll see today, and many others, like Heather McGhee and Kathy Park Hong. Our books have been bestsellers, they've won awards, but they've also drawn a heavy backlash. Our writers have had their books challenged and banned, have had events canceled, have even found themselves called out by name by presidents, senators, and in dozens of pieces of legislation across the country. So we've had a front row seat in seeing the power of our stories, but also the threat that power still presents to people in power who will seek to have those stories silenced, erased, and buried. But we are here tonight to show that those efforts have failed and will continue to fail. We're here to celebrate the power of our stories and hear from our storytellers in their own words. And I just want to, echo everyone else here, which is that I'm sorry we're not doing this live and in person, but I'm so grateful that you're here with us tonight in this virtual setting. I think Elizabeth has some people to thank for tonight's event.
Yes, so yeah, absolutely. So real quick, thank you so much, Chris. So excited to hear from our brilliant, brilliant authors. And just quickly, we wanted to acknowledge that while One World over-indexes in banned books, we're not the only publishers who have been affected by this dynamic. And so we just want to salute the writers, the publishers, everybody on the front lines of this issue, and particularly those of you who are here with us tonight. So thank you for your courage and for your consistency and commitment. And I particularly wanted to salute our partners in this event. One of the things we were so excited about was creating an opportunity to connect the ideas with the action. And so I wanted to particularly thank Firelight Media, our core partner, the Open Society Foundation, which has played a huge role in resourcing this event. Also want to thank Black Voters Matter, Color of Change, Unite Against Book Bans, Georgia Association of Educators, Georgia Youth and Justice Coalition, Southern Poverty Law Center, ACLU Georgia, Southern Black Girls and Women's Consortium, the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, the King Center, National Black Arts Festival, Race Forward, our bookseller, 44th and 3rd, please go patronize them, and our hosts, Morehouse College. Thank you all so much.
Well, thank you, Chris and Elizabeth, for one, thank you for your courage. Thank you for continuing to be the light and literally create this space for the literary arts. And so now I want to bring on Skip Dye, who is the chair of Penguin Random House's Intellectual Freedom Taskforce. He'll help us better understand kind of the explosion of restrictions on reading and what you can do about it. Skip?
Sure, thank you. I'm trying to get my camera to do what I want it to do. Thank you, everybody. Oh my gosh, I wish I was there in person. Just like everybody said, I have been traveling around with our own little bandwagon, as we've been going around visiting 9 cities, and that's going to go through the mid of October. So hopefully you'll come to a city near you and you can hear more about it. But like LaTosha said, I get to work with these great, wonderful people. I work for Penguin Random House, the world's largest trade publisher and home to One World, as was said. I chair the Intellectual Freedom Taskforce, and our mission is simple, and it's to advocate for and to protect our authors' right to be read. It's very clear that this is under challenge right now. This principle that we have, that free people read freely, is fundamental to our democracy. Books have had the power to transform lives. It inspires minds. It opens up doors to new worlds. They're mirrors that reflect our souls and windows into diverse experiences. At Penguin Random House, our goal is to create books for everyone by seeking out diverse and brilliant talents like we have here tonight and supporting them and realizing their ideas. But as we've been hearing, the book bans have been threatening this mission of ours. Book challenges and bans, they've existed for millennia. Societies have always sought to limit certain ideas because books have the power to liberate the mind, to liberate the soul. From anti-literacy laws in the antebellum South to McCarthyism all the way into the 50s, individuals, groups, and states have historically passed laws to remove books from libraries and schools to prevent certain stories from being told. Even correctional facilities have a long and horrible history of restricting access to books. But what makes this current trend different is that the huge and remarkable rate which book challenges and bans are increasing in our country. Now, while individual books were targeted in the past, certain bans that we're seeing now are part of a much broader cultural conflict aimed at books about race and gender and sexuality. The American Library Association noted a 65% increase in book censorship in just the past year, with over 4,200 unique titles targeted for removal from library shelves. Just recently, PEN America reported their new report card on the most recent academic year and cited over 10,000 books banned in schools. Now, whereas this trend used to involve, like I said, 1 or 2 titles being challenged, now 89% of the challenges and bans involve multiple titles, sometimes hundreds of books. In 17 states alone, there are more than 100 books that have been challenged or pulled from library shelves. Nearly half of these were LGBTQ stories or stories by Black authors and other people of color. Also, books about women and sexuality. One World and PRH, unfortunately, have a significant number of our works being challenged, including, as you said before, like the 1619 Project, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and In Between the World and Me, and other books. All have been attacked, as you heard, by senators, legislators, called out at school board meetings as being dangerous and inappropriate. Well-funded organizations like Moms for Liberty, No Left Turn in Education, other localized groups are taking over school boards and library boards, changing long-standing policies around book selections and book banning and restricting titles off the shelves, and also putting into question the authority and the talents of our teachers and our librarians. States like Tennessee, Texas, Iowa, Utah, Idaho, and other states, 14 other states, have passed laws enabling book bans. For instance, Georgia State Senate Bill 226 changed actually the process to how a book is actually reviewed for a challenge, which makes it even easier for books to be pulled from shelves. But people are fighting back, and that we must remember. We can make a difference. Here, our Intellectual Freedom Task Force, we're trying to do the best we can. PRH and a coalition of publishers, authors, the Literary Guild, parents, students, educators, librarians have filed a suit challenging Florida's House Bill 1069. And I am glad to say just today, we refiled a new lawsuit against Iowa's Senate filing 496. We have had many wins, winning injunctions, halting some of these new laws from going into effect, citing them all as violations of the First Amendment. Penguin Random House and One World has been leading the efforts to support free speech, the right to information, and the right to be read. Now, it's important to note that all these book bans, the vast majority of Americans oppose them. And they actually are against restricting materials for students and patrons. Surveys by the Knight Foundation and the American Family Survey, the American Library Association, and other bipartisan groups have shown that over 65 Americans believe it's important for public schools and libraries to include books with a variety of perspectives and viewpoints. So now, what can you do? First off, I say stay informed. Know what's going on around you. Learn about what challenges may be happening in your own community. One resource is to go to one of our partners tonight and many of the other partners here today. But you may want to try uniteagainstbookbans.org. There you can join and get localized information about what's happening near you, but also on the national level. It's also important to support your local schools and your libraries, particularly the educators and librarians. They are under a lot of challenge. You can support them also by attending school board meetings and library board meetings, and to speak out in favor for the work that they're doing. Now, remember, the key to all of this is having conversation. That's the thing I tell people all the time. Please have conversations with your friends, with your neighbors. Tell everyone about why it's important to have diverse books in the library and schools, and why librarians and teachers are so important. And finally, you got to exercise your right to vote. That's clearly one of the key things that's on the ballot now, particularly in local elections. Go vote in your school board elections. Go vote in your library board elections. Get involved. Understand. Find out what legislators are for and against. Research a candidate. Know what their viewpoints are before you exercise your rights. Books foster compassion. They broaden our connections. They have made a world of difference to many people, including myself. They've saved my life. By omitting certain voices from our libraries, we halt our collective good. We stop people from reading freely. By standing together, all of us, we can defend our right to read and the right to be read, ensuring future generations can explore the wide array of the wonderful things we are as humans. So I'm going to thank you all tonight. Thanks for having me here, and please be safe. Thanks.
Skip, thank you so much. Let's now bring on our One World editor-in-chief again, Chris Jackson. He's going to come back out to talk about the power of reporting in history with one of my favorite authors, Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Thank you so much, LaTosha. And thank you, Skip, for those words as well. So I'd like to introduce Ta-Nehisi Coates, an award-winning author and journalist. His books include Between the World and Me, The Water Dancer, and The Message, which will be published by One World on October 1st, 2024, which is next Tuesday. And he's currently a writer in residence at Howard University. So let's welcome Ta-Nehisi to our stage.
Thank you for welcoming me to the stage, Chris.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. All right, so we have 20 minutes. So we're going to hit the ground running.
All right, let's go.
So you have a book coming out next week, which is very exciting. You also had a book that came out almost 10 years ago called Between the World and Me, which I'm sure many people here in the audience have read. So before we get started talking about the message, and since we're talking about kind of the significance of stories and storytelling, I wanted to ask you a question about your, last original work of nonfiction, Between the World and Me. And if you go back to the day before that book came out on July 14th, 2015. Go back to July 13th, 2015. How do you think the world has changed, even incrementally or in personal ways, or in sort of broad, global national ways since the publication of the book? And what effect do you think that book has had on the world 10 years out?
Well, the last question is not the one that I'm really capable of answering. I, like the writer, and I think you already knew that, but that's okay. I'll forgive you for that. The writers are within the thing themselves. You really you don't have the capacity, I don't think. At least I don't have the capacity to see myself or see my work outside of myself. And in fact, my wife often tells me that if I did, I would be an asshole. So it's maybe good that I can't see it. So that part I would leave for everybody else to judge. Hopefully, it's had a positive impact. To the extent that it's had any. Maybe more interesting is how much the world has. Yes, I did very well. So more interesting is how the world has changed itself. Because I think I maybe take a different view than a lot of or some of my compatriots, and certainly that view is made manifest at least in the second essay in the book, or the third essay in the book in South Carolina. I think that the very thing that we are here to talk about, book banning, is reference to the fact, or is evidence of the fact of actually the progress that's been made, and the great success that some of the movements that certainly my work comes out of have had. Book banning is a very crude form of repression. It's very obvious and very direct, and it only happens, to my knowledge, when people are afraid. I think if people weren't afraid, there would be no need to ban the books in the first place. And so that you have so many authors who have found themselves in that situation, and their work in that situation says that this is an actual threat. And so, for me, I always get, part of me always gets excited, when I see, Ibram's work on such a list, when I see Nikole's work on such a list, or my work on such a list, because it means that people are, even if some in some dim way, aware of the power of the work and what it actually can do.
Yeah, it's funny when I talk to people sometimes about like sort of these book bannings that are happening around the country. One of the things that always I remember from just going back to like before your first book came out, before Bryan's book came out, before Nikole Hannah-Jones's work, before Ibram's work came out, is that our understanding of the world, our understanding of history was very different than what it is today. And I think sometimes we take for granted that, well, of course, like when, thinking about our own children, even like my son is a 16-year-old in high school. He's been taught these books since he was in middle school. We were not taught books like this when we were in middle school and high school, which is one of the reasons why, that sense of necessity, I think, drove you to write Between the World and Me. And really all of our writers here tonight were driven by a sense of necessity, a sense of absence in the literature.
I think you're exactly right, but I don't think the conception of the country is the same, certainly, as it was when I was growing up. It's just not the case. And I think what really, really scares people is the work of some of the authors that you have, or many of the authors that you have assembled tonight, that it is finding its way in the public schools. Again, just because this is the essay that most relates in the message, the South Carolina chapter, I tried to tease out, what actually happened and what the origin of this, is. And my unoriginal observation was that actually what happened was the protest movement of 2020 that followed George Floyd actually occasioned this curiosity, among some percentage of white people in this country, that maybe they had been lied to about some things, and I think because all white people, or even most white people, are not where we would like them to be, or where we sometimes, feel they should be, we can, sometimes be dismissive, and not actually perceive that movements actually do matter, and so it was very interesting to me that when that protest movement could not really be beaten in the street, because the efforts to beat it in the street only evidence the truth of the fact. You send the cops out to crack somebody's head, that just makes the point more. You know what I mean? It was very interesting that they turned to the libraries, that they turned to the schools. What does it mean when you have a president of the United States that takes out an executive order against a Black woman who's a New York Times reporter? I mean, that That is saying something. I don't think I've ever witnessed anything like that. It actually, might, be a first for us, in our history. But that man wasn't wrong. As foolish as he can be and as ridiculous as he can be, I maintain he was not wrong about the power of the work and the potential of its effects. He was right to be scared.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's right. So let's talk a little bit about The Message, which is your new book coming out. And it's I think, appropriate to our conversation tonight. It's a book about stories and storytelling, and while also being its own story. And like a lot of your work, it's a combination of sort of personal essay writing, deep research, and out in the world reporting in this kind of weave. Now, you go to 3 different places in the book. You go to Senegal, South Carolina, and then to Palestine. We've talked a little bit about the South Carolina chapter, where you go and actually investigate a book banning, in fact, a banning of your own book in a small town outside of Columbia, South Carolina. But let's go start with the first essay in this kind of conversation tonight about the book, because that's one that I've probably been in a weird way grappling the most with still in my mind, even after going through it so many times with you in our editorial process. It's about Africa, one particular country in Africa, one city, one site in Africa, very specific, but it's also about Africa writ large. There's an old tradition of Black American writers venturing to Africa, hoping to discover some connection, some kinship. But there's something in your essay that felt new, I think, and reflective of kind of the moment that we're in right now historically. And I think it's because Africa is no longer presented to us largely as a story of Tarzan and cannibals in the jungle. So that so many writers in the past felt the need to kind of dispel this myth of Africa as being this primitive place. You found yourself actually approaching it from a very different angle, almost dispelling a different kind of myth. So can you tell us a little bit about the story of Africa you brought with you on your first trip to the continent, and what you discovered there?
Yeah, I mean, I it's not so much that I brought that story with me, because I think by the time I went, I come to some realizations. This is, in its own way, The Message is a book about nationalisms. And the nationalisms that particularly attract me are not the nationalisms that in their origin necessarily, I guess I can't say that either. Man, Jesus, this is hard. Sorry, I'm trying to really get, let me say that the nationalisms of oppressed groups, that's probably the best way to put it. That's
Right.
the most honest way I can put it. And those nationalisms, I think, tend to be the most seductive and the most sympathetic. And I was raised adjacent to one. My name is an ancient Egyptian name that is a reference to the ancient kingdom of Nubia, and I was given that name because my parents wanted to give me a name that rejected a story of Africa, and not just rejected a story of Africa, because Africa and stories about Africa and images of Africa and imagery of Africa is the origin point of all of the racism that we endure, all the stories of racism that we endured. I came up in a generation, was raised on a history, given names that sought to explicitly reject that. And I think that was important. I think I probably would not even have been able to write the very essay that I wrote investigating that story without the first step having happened. But one of the things that I try to push in The Message is, even when the stories are those that are crafted by people who are oppressed, even when their stories and nationalism crafted, in the cause of resistance and liberation, they sometimes can lead us awry. And we, very much should question the foundations of those stories, and in the case of Senegal, it was me probably interrogating this notion of, and it isn't Between the World and Me. I mean, it's kind of a pickup from Between the World and Me, that the way in which to reject the racist presumptions of the West and Western civilization is to accept them and to find our own. So if you got kings, we got kings too. You built great monuments, we built great monuments too. You wrote great works of literature, we did great works too. But one thing that I insist on throughout the book and in my politics is that the dignity of human beings is innate. It is not in stone. It's not even in books. It is in the fact that they are humans themselves, and it really does not matter if my ancestors were kings or queens or not. My ancestors could have been dirt farmers. I did not deserve to be enslaved and carried off and brought over here and subjected to genocide. That's, the real conclusion that has to be come to. And so it was kind of a confrontation with that part. And then after having had that confrontation, so what is left? What does Africa then mean? You know what I mean? If it's not this site of, utopic glory, what does it then mean? And that's what that first essay is about.
Yeah, and I think you come, and I won't spoil the end of that essay, you come to a really interesting place in terms of what it means. What does Africa mean? More specifically, what do individual Africans mean to you?
To us, yes.
And to us. And I think it's really a profound and I think, humble essay in a lot of ways, because you really do, or vulnerable essay, because you really do kind of explore some of your own priors and those of your family, but also I think you have a really powerful confrontation with the myths that drove them, and drove a lot of us to our beliefs in the first place. So very quickly, and unfortunately we don't have that much time.
Let's want to talk about Palestine very quickly.
Well, we're going to talk about, it's not about Palestine, which people can hear Ta-Nehisi opine about for the next month all over the country. But more this question, which I think is more connected to our sort of banned book theme, which is why? So, we've talked many times about how Europe Between the World and Me, which, drew a certain amount of controversy, the case reparations, which drew a certain amount of controversy, the Black family in the age of mass incarceration, which drew a certain amount of controversy, and then the first white president, which drew enormous amounts of controversy on the election of Donald Trump. And then you took off for a while in terms of writing nonfiction. You wrote a novel, which generated no controversy, but lots of.
It was great. It was wonderful.
It was amazing.
Yeah, a great time.
And so you were like, here's a subject I should take on then. Palestine, which is one that is, no matter what you write, you are guaranteed to run into opposition, like strong opposition. So if we could have sort of a meta discussion about it very quickly, why did you choose a subject that was so polarizing?
What Black writer who considers themselves in the history of Frederick Douglass, who considers himself in the lineage of Ida B. Wells, who considers themselves in the lineage of W.E.B. Du Bois, what Black writer says, I am not going to write about things because people might get upset with me? That is a ethic and a way of seeing the world that I am not familiar with in my tradition. And so what I felt, and I guess I felt this more than anything, coming back, when I see systems that are reminiscent of the systems that my parents grew up under the weight of, that are reminiscent of the systems that my grandparents grew up under the weight of. When I see people and I recognize immediately what they're going through, and this is the key part, and I discover evidence that those systems are being upheld by a country that claims to have thrown those systems away and gotten past that. And when I discover that my own imprimatur, that my own tax dollars are on those systems and maintain those systems, then I have a duty and I have a responsibility to take that on. I am not worth my weight. I'm not worth anything as a Black writer if I see that and I recognize a thing that I claim to be at war with, and I see it warring against another people, and I am subsidizing it, and I decide to look the other way. I'm not worth anything. It's not even worth having this conversation about banned books. I deserve to be banned then, because I'm not worthy. You understand? And so there was really no way to write anything else. There was no other option. This had to be done. And it needs to be done. And it should, continue to be done by other writers, other Black writers. I want to emphasize that.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I think we're gonna have to unfortunately leave it there, but you, in this book, you say at the beginning of the book, and then you repeat at the end, this is not a spoiler, the job of writers is nothing less than to save the world.
Yeah, I believe that.
I think the book is itself evidence of what that might look like. So thank you for the book. It'll be coming out next week. Someone put in the chat what Ta-Nehisi's tour is going to be looking like. So if you're in one of those places, hurry up and get a ticket because they're selling out very quickly. And thank you so much for joining us, Ta-Nehisi.
Thanks. I just saw my Aunt Joanne in the chat, so I gotta say hey, Aunt Joanne. Thank y'all.
What's up to Joanne? All right, thank you. LaTosha?
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me, over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. I wasn't really intending on singing that, but I was actually so moved by what Ta-Nehisi said that for some, the words are the way we fight. They're the words that we actually affirm our humanity. They are the words that we share the story. They're the words, it's through the words that actually keeps us grounded in our own humanity, our own imaginations. And so that there were many that created this song, that sung this song around freedom, that literally here we have years and years and years, decades, hundreds of years afterwards, and we're still drawing strength from that word. That is the power of the word. And so given that, I want to welcome Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, who is a National Book Award winning author of 16 books for adults and children, including How to Be an Antiracist. Dr. Kendi is an Andrew W. Mellon Professor in Humanities at Boston University and is director of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research. He's going to talk about being an author of banned books with a parent in this era of book banning. And I also consider him a friend. Great to see you, Brother Kendi. I'm happy to hear what you are going to share with us.
Well, let me say it's an honor, LaTosha, to share this virtual stage with you. It's always an honor and pleasure. I also just want to thank Chris and Elizabeth for your leadership of our writing community. It's also an honor to share the stage with Jason and Skip and Nia. And of course, it's an honor to share this virtual space with these three authors that I deeply admire. And I want to congratulate Bryan Stevenson on the 10-year anniversary of the publication of Just Mercy. I want to commend Nikole Hannah-Jones on the publication next month of 1619 Project, A Visual Experience. And I want to applaud Ta-Nehisi Coates on the publication next week of The Message. I'm even more excited after listening to him talk, about that book to dive in it. And, I just want to shout out these books and authors. And I really wish I had the time to shout out so many titles and so many authors in our country who've been banned, because authors are my lifeline. No matter what I write, no matter what I may do, at my core, I'm a reader. I didn't really grow up a reader. I didn't really become a reader until graduate school, until I entered this space of readers, until other readers opened me up to books I hadn't read, until I started jotting down those titles and authors in a notepad, until I found those books and read them. I still remember that first year of graduate school because I literally spent almost every available moment reading when I wasn't in class, when I wasn't completing assignments, when I wasn't pushing my introverted self out to socialize, when I wasn't watching reruns of Martin, when I was eating. Anybody know anything about Martin? I was reading. I read more books that first year of graduate school than probably all my years of living beforehand. And so it was a truly liberatory experience for me. It was one of the most liberatory experiences of my life, and it remains a liberatory experience to read, to be a reader. And I want my daughters to become readers. I want them cherishing books like treasures. I want them consuming pages like they consume their favorite food, them feeding and freeing their minds through the page. So as a reader, as someone trying to raise readers, I wanted us to contextualize sort of book bans, particularly through history. I wanted to take a few moments for us to think even about what could potentially come next after book bans with using history as a guide. It happened on May 10th, 1933. University students and brown shirts plundered libraries, they plundered synagogues, they plundered private homes, they plundered research institutes, they plundered perhaps the most valuable treasures of their nation, of our nation. Not gold, not diamonds, they plundered books. These Germans had been shackled by Nazi propaganda. They didn't know how much they didn't know. They didn't know how much their ignorance of their ignorance allowed their minds to be captured. They didn't know how trapped they were from reality. So as they plundered those books, many of them didn't realize that their lives would one day be plundered by Hitler's imperial ambitions during and even before World War II. Many of them didn't realize that in a few years, many of their homes would be burned by bombs. Many of them would die fiery deaths on the battlefield. And Hitler would blame international Jewry for their grief. He inflicted on them in the way neo-Nazis today all over the world are blaming immigrants and Muslims for the pain they inflict on their constituents. If only they read those books that they burned. If only they realized how suicidal bigotry can be. If only. It was a few months after Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. His Nazi party had decreed that any book that acts subversively on our future or strikes at the root of German thought, the German home, and the driving forces of our people should be burned. Those German students and brown shirts carried tens of thousands of books to public squares around Germany. In Berlin, they set an enormous bonfire of books in Opera Square. They claimed they were burning away the so-called un-German spirit. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels came out and applauded these brown shirts and students for burning what they called un-German books. How many times have they called the 1619 Project un-American? How many times have they followed up their book bans with calls for so-called patriotic education today? Almost every book that has been banned in recent years has been called un-American or anti-American. I'll never forget when one parent in South Carolina told school board members with a straight face that he would fight to the death to ensure his children aren't being indoctrinated by the anti-American ideology of stamps. One of those places those Nazis plundered 90 years ago in Berlin was the Institute for Sexual Science. It had become world-renowned for its pioneering research and advocacy on behalf of homosexuals, of women, of transgender people. At the time, Germany criminalized homosexuality in the way certain US states are criminalizing gender-affirming care today. The outspoken and prominent director of the Institute for Sexual Science, Magnus Hirschfeld, had already fled Germany. Like many Jews, like many homosexuals, like many anti-Nazi Germans. He was in exile in Nice, France, and that's where he received the news that all of the books in his institute's library had been stolen and burned in Berlin's Opera Square. At the time, Hirschfeld had started to write a new book to explain to the world, to history, what befell him and so many people like him in Nazi Germany. Hirschfeld titled this book, Racism. It was the first known book with that term. Indeed, Hirschfeld's book helped popularize the term racism in the 1930s. Racism, the book, was published in German in 1934, in English in 1938. And now, nearly a century later, almost every popular book that explains or documents racism in the United States has been banned. Nazis set Hirschfeld's earlier books on homosexuality ablaze in Opera Square back in 1933. They set ablaze books by Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud and Jack London and Karl Marx and H.G. Wells. They even burned a book by Heinrich Heine that contained the passage, "When they burn books, in the end, they will burn humans too." A prophetic passage. It is still a prophetic passage. Consider the United States right now, where they ban books by authors of color. They want to ban immigrants of color. Where they ban books about racism, they want to ban anti-racist writers. Where they ban books about homophobia and transphobia, they want to ban queer people. Where they ban Muslim books, they want to ban Muslims. Where they ban anti-Zionist speech, they want to ban anti-Zionist students and faculty. Where they ban books, in the end, they will ban humans too. This is what we are facing. This is what we must resist. Not merely, though, resist, envision, and even create. We should be striving to envision and create a world, the type of world where in the end, we never ban humans. Thank you.
Wow. I feel like I just had a sermon. I don't know about everybody else, but I felt like I had a sermon. And in the midst of all of what you just raised, brother, in the midst of all that you've raised, we continue to write. We continue to lift our words. We continue to create. And so I want to center that tonight we are celebrating our storytelling, right? Because what we do know is that story sometimes is our strategy, but sometimes story is our strength. And so we are operating in the fullness of our strength. And given that, just to really demonstrate kind of the power of story and how story in itself can be transformative and transformational to even to ourselves, that I want to introduce next. I want to bring on Jason Hernandez, who is an advocate working to end mass incarceration and the school to prison pipeline. He is also the author of a forthcoming One World book, memoir. And he's going to talk about reading The New Jim Crow and how that book has been banned by many educational systems and educational facilities. But he read this book while he was in prison, and it was transformative for him. And I want him to share. Welcome. Let's welcome our brother, Jason Hernandez.
Thank you, LaTosha Brown. It's an honor to be here, especially with such amazing authors and writers. But I want to talk about one extremely amazing author and writer, not just to me, but to many individuals across the United States. And that's Michelle Alexander, the author of The New Jim Crow. When I read this book, The New Jim Crow, written by Michelle Alexander, it was in the fall of 2010 while I was in El Reno, Oklahoma prison, serving my 12th year of a life sentence without parole, plus 320 years for a nonviolent drug offense. I had just got this book right before a 4 o'clock count. And 4 o'clock count is where they count every prisoner in the United States. You're typically locked in your room for 30 minutes, but it can go longer sometimes, even days. And I always read at this time. And this particular count, I read The New Jim Crow, which I had just received from the interlibrary loan system. I look back, every time I get a book, I always want to see who wrote it. And I looked at the back of this book and I wanted to see the person, who I was about to read. And I saw this picture of Michelle Alexander, and she didn't look like she had ever been to prison, and she didn't look like she was from the hood. And I kind of smirked to myself thinking, how could she tell me something about prison or drugs that I didn't already know? And in the front of this book, there was these bars and these brown hands gripping these bars. And if I didn't know what the book was going to be about, I would have thought that it was some type of horror novel. And actually, as I started to read it, it was a horror novel, and I was one of the main characters in it. As I began to read, page after page, I had, gotten pulled into this book like I had never been pulled into a book before. Michelle had laid out an indictment illustrating that the war on drugs had in fact been a war against minorities, and that it was not by accident that 2/3 of the 2.1 million individuals incarcerated were Black or brown, despite the fact that we only made up 1/3 of the United States population. That it was not by accident that 1 out of every 3 Black kids or 1 out of every 6 Latino kids would end up going to prison in their lifetime. And as I laid in my bunk reading, the cell door unlocked, which always, snaps you out, wakes you up to an extent. And what I didn't know was that at this time that I had been so captured by Michelle's words that this 30-minute count actually turned into a 4-hour count. I then remember, walking out of my cell dazed from what I had read. Then, walking to the tier and looking into the pod of all these prisoners. But, this time, I looked at these individuals in a different way. I looked at them in a way I had never looked at them before. I saw a black person, black person, black person, life, 30, brown person, brown person, brown person, life, 30 years, 30 years, white person, white person, white person, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years. And then I began to think back to my community and how everyone in my community, black and brown, had either been arrested, gone to jail, or gone to prison. And I mean everybody. As I stood there, a wave of emotion came over me, sadness, anger, rage. I thought, how could this be happening and no one do nothing to stop it? How could this be going on? And I not see it, though I had been in the heart of it, that I had also contributed to it as well. I knew I wanted to do something about it, but I didn't know what. I thought, what could I do as well? I was just a prisoner. That night when they locked us up in our cells for the 10 o'clock count, I would end up reading the rest of the New Jim Crow. And that's where I would find, my calling, I believe. In the last chapter, Michelle is titled The Fire This Time. And Michelle talks about how civil rights groups and their failure and actually neglect to stand up for the rights of those that were part of the criminal justice system and how their silence actually had contributed to mass incarceration of colored people. She then stated that there was going to be a time when there was going to be a new breed, a new era of advocates, that would take down this system, and that it would be those individuals who were locked up and locked out. And when I read those words, I knew that she was talking about me. So, this would inspire me to start my own organization, which advocated to the president to grant clemency to crack cocaine offenders serving life without parole. I would create writings, documents, highlighting real life stories of those of us behind the wall serving life sentences, many of whom I knew for over a decade, many who had been in prison for over decades, and all who were Black. And I sent these documents, these news to newspapers, magazines, civil rights groups, congressmen, anyone that I thought that would listen and could help us out. I used toothpaste, my typewriter, glue to make these little short versions of the New Jim Crow that I would pass out to the people that were incarcerated, because I wanted them to see what I had saw. But then even after I mailed everything out, nobody answered, nobody wrote me back to help. But there was one person that I didn't reach out to, and that was Michelle. And I decided to write her asking, could she help us? And she wrote back, and she said that of all the injustices that were brought on by the war on drugs, there was none that highlighted it more than crack cocaine offenders serving life without parole. And she would connect me to Vanita Gupta of the ACLU, who was in charge of their sentencing reform division at that time. Along with the stuff I would mail out, I also mailed a letter to President Obama asking him to release me as well. And in 2013, my life without parole sentence plus 320 years would be reduced to 20 years. I was released in 2015, and that was after serving nearly 18 years. And there's no doubt in my mind, had I not read the New Jim Crow, I'd still be serving life without parole right now, or possibly even, probably even dead. My older brother, JJ, was not as fortunate, though. He was in prison when his life was taken by 2 other prisoners. I often wonder, had these 2 individuals read the New Jim Crow, would they have still taken my brother's life? Would the anger and the hate they had instilled in them that made them pick up a knife against my brother have persuaded them to pick up a pen instead and take down the system as I felt I had did? But now, because of One World, my memoir will soon be released, but there's a very, very real likelihood that my memoir will become part of these books that have been banned. And I think that if anybody needs to read my book, it's those that are incarcerated, especially those 2 individuals that took my brother's life. I want them to know I forgive them. I want them to know, I want the world to know that we weren't born to be prisoners. And I think one last thing, just being on this panel and seeing all these great individuals, it just reminds me of a quote that's also in the New Jim Crow, where Michelle quotes James Baldwin, where he says, You know, we come from a long line of poets, great poets. And one of them once said, just when I thought that I was lost, my dungeon shook and my chains fell off. And I just want to tell y'all just to keep writing, and that those individuals are people incarcerated need to hear these words. And just thank y'all so much.
Jason, I am so inspired, brother. I cannot wait for your book to be released. Thank you for sharing your story. It's through your story that we're pulling strength, but we bear witness to the transformative power of story. And so thank you so much for sharing, to putting words to paper, for doing the work that you've done. This is why we do the work. This is why we have to celebrate. This is why we have to continue to bear witness and recognize that words, it is literally through our story that spirit actually takes form. And so you're actually helping us to anchor in that way. So I so appreciate you. And then next, I'm going to bring Chris Jackson back for our next conversation that I'm super, super excited about. Chris.
Thank you so much, LaTosha, and thank you, Jason, for that very moving story. It's fascinating to think now that Jason and Michelle might be published on the same list, which is just a really powerful statement about, you know, what that work has done and how it's producing more work. Okay, so we have two more writers coming. I don't want to say my favorite writers because they're all my favorite writers, but writers who I feel incredibly honored to have been able to work with them on their groundbreaking projects. First, Nikole Hannah-Jones, Pulitzer Prize winning creator of the 1619 Project and a staff writer at the New York Times Magazine, and the creator of the 1619 Project, A New Origin Story, which was an instant #1 New York Times bestseller and stayed at #1 for weeks and weeks, as I remember. So welcome, Nikole. And I would also like to welcome Bryan Stevenson, the founder and executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, and a widely acclaimed public interest lawyer who has dedicated his career to helping the poor, the incarcerated, and the condemned. One World is happy to be celebrating the 10th anniversary of his #1 New York Times bestseller, Just Mercy's powerful true story about the potential for mercy to redeem us as individuals and even as a country, and a clarion call to fix our broken system of justice. So I'd like to welcome two absolute powerhouses, Nikole Hannah-Jones and Bryan Stevenson.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
Good evening to you. All right, so, you know, I started off when we were talking with Ta-Nehisi, asking this question about, you know, the world before his book came out and the world that we live in today. Now, Bryan, your book now 10 years since its initial publication, and Nikole, we're 5 years since the 1619 Project first launched as a magazine issue. 5 years, it seems like much longer than that. It's been a very eventful 5 years. But just as with Ta-Nehisi, you know, I think the world since 2015 in terms of being able to tell certain kinds of stories changed. When you think about, and particularly in the areas that you were writing about, our ideas about justice, punishment, incarceration, and the death penalty, how do you think, and not for you to take credit for Just Mercy having done all of this work, but how is the world, you know, how have you seen it change in the last 10 years? And how is your book involved in that change, if you're willing to speak to that?
Well, I do think there's a different temperature when you start talking about over-incarceration, when you start talking about the death penalty and excessive punishment, than there was when I started doing this work. I mean, we couldn't even get a lot of people in the civil rights community to prioritize the plight of all of these people being executed. It was a real struggle for 2 decades to get this issue in a place where people would care. And I think that has shifted radically. And obviously Michelle's book and a lot of other people's writings have contributed to that. But I'm really excited about the energy that is now fueling lots of young people and others to end this carceral crisis that was created in the 70s and 80s when politicians from both political parties started demonizing people who were being accused of drug addiction or drug dependency. I mean, I think this is the thing I think that's so unique, important to remember is prison population in the United States was largely stable through most of the 20th century. it didn't shift. We had a prison population of less than 300,000 in 1973. And it's in the 70s when everybody was saying people who are drug addicted and drug dependent are criminals and should be punished for their addiction and dependency, instead of saying people who suffer from addiction and dependency have a health problem that requires a healthcare intervention. We put hundreds of thousands of people in our jails and prisons and became this country with the highest rate of incarceration in the world. But I'm really encouraged by the shift that I've seen among people, activists, organizers, clergy, professionals working in this system. 8 states have abolished the death penalty since Just Mercy came out. Death sentencing rates have dropped dramatically in this country over the last 10 years. Execution rates have dropped dramatically, despite the fact that we just had an execution in Alabama this evening. And so there is a different environment. The state with the largest death row population, California, has declared a moratorium. Pennsylvania has a moratorium. So we've seen real progress. When I started doing this work, there were thousands of children condemned to die in prison with life imprisonment without parole. Now there are over 1,000 people who were told they were going to die in prison for crimes they committed at 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, who have been released. And they're out in the world, and I get to meet them, and we hug one another. And some of them are doing the most powerful and effective anti-crime work in the country. They're in the streets of DC and Philadelphia and Chicago, disrupting crime. They're actually contributing to public safety when they were told they should be condemned for the crimes they commit. So all of that, I think, is really exciting and energizing. But it is also important to note that for the first time in my life, we are doing this work to kind of confront over-incarceration and racial injustice without a US Supreme Court that believes in these ideas. We are back in the 1860s and 70s where we have a court that is pushing back against the legislative efforts that try to create more opportunities, pushing back against many of the efforts to educate and inspire. We had an execution this week of a man in Missouri where the prosecutor said he should not be executed. Unprecedented. Prosecutor said, don't execute this man in Missouri because of evidence about innocence. And he was executed anyway. And so we're in a very different space in the legal system, which is what I think makes the narrative work and the work that all of these amazing authors are doing to educate and inspire such a critical priority. This is the time for the narrative struggle. It's no longer going to be a legal struggle at the forefront. I think it's going to be a narrative struggle. And I'm encouraged at the energy of young people and activists and advocates that we're better positioned to carry out that struggle, to wage that battle than we were, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I would say that's the big difference when you say we're going back to the 1870s, 1860s. In some ways, the difference is that narrative struggle, which I think has really shifted. And I'm glad you used that language, because I think in terms of thinking about, well, what has changed over this time? Like, yes, there's been amazing changes, I think, in, all those things you mentioned, in terms of the actual application of the death penalty and other punishments. But another change is every middle schooler I know, every high schooler I know has read your book. They have to read it. They're forced to read your book. And I think this speaks to both the power, but also the threat. And this is why we keep running into these situations of book banning, because, even if the Supreme Court is doing what the Supreme Court is doing, you have a generation that is coming up with a very different understanding of something like the death penalty. When I was a kid, death penalty was considered to be completely acceptable. And now kids are being raised to understand its origins, where it comes from, and why it's wrong. And that's incredibly powerful. And Nikole, I just want to ask you the same question about the world before the 1619 Project came out versus the world we're living in now, and what role you think your work has played in shaping that.
So first, let me just say I'm so bummed that I couldn't be in Atlanta and that everyone couldn't be in Atlanta. I'm such a fan and admirer of all of the authors who are going to be featured, and everyone has spoken so powerfully tonight, but I can only imagine I would be in the room in the Amen choir. So I'm really, really sad that weather had to make that impossible. And I'm sitting here, I've had the opportunity to have several discussions with Bryan, and I know I've told him that I was I was reading Just Mercy on the plane and I started crying like a baby. And I'm not the type of person who does that. Just the inhumanity that is allowed in our name. And it was one of those transformative texts for me where, you know, the system is unfair, you know, it's unjust, but you kind of just allowed yourself to ignore it because you couldn't really grapple with the truth of it. And that book just forces you to confront a reality in a way that few books have. And of course, all of the powerful memory work that you're doing in Montgomery. If you all have not been there, it would change your life. And I know you have single-handedly revived the economy of that former slave hub. So just really grateful. And of course, the work of Ibram and the work of Ta-Nehisi, and with such a powerful testimony that we've heard tonight. So anyway, I'm sad that we have to do this over Zoom, but I'm just grateful to still have the opportunity to listen to you all and for everyone who joined. So on your question, I mean, what impact have I had? Sorry, y'all. I'm sorry for anti-CRT. I'm sorry for the divisive concept laws. I'm sorry for all of that. Okay, blame it on me.
I'm the culprit. Right here.
You know, it's been 5 years, but it does feel like much longer. I mean, if you think about it, the 1619 Project first published prior to George Floyd's murder, prior to COVID, prior to the insurrection on the Capitol. Like, so much has happened in the United States since then that to me proves the entire thesis of the project, right? Which is that we've been all collectively taught the history of a country that has never existed. And that history does not explain the reality that we're all having to grapple with. And until we can come to terms with the truth, we are going to continue to face this deep, often violent polarization and inequality that we allow. You know, Bryan Stevenson's work on the death penalty, that is a legacy of slavery. Obviously, the new Jim Crow, that is a legacy of slavery. What Ibram is writing about, what Ta-Nehisi is writing about, these are all legacies of slavery. And we like to tend to think that legacies of slavery only impact Black folks, but they don't. It is a collective suffering that is caused by our inability to grapple honestly with who we were, so we can grapple honestly with who we are. So, you know, we've gone in that 5 years from a very brief racial reckoning to what Ibram aptly calls the racist reckoning, right? The racist progress that we're in. And we're seeing a tremendous backlash. And that backlash begins with a backlash against narrative. And then they use that backlash against narrative to change policies and to change laws and to justify the changing of policies and the changing of laws. So we really are in a narrative war. And the reason our books have been banned and our books have been challenged is they understand as well as we do that it's narrative more than anything else that drives policy. That it's not the data, it's not the facts, it's not humanity, it's not what the peer-reviewed research says is the best thing to do. It is narrative. It is how are we taught to think about these things? How are we taught to think of people as human or not, as deserving of punishment or not, as pathological or not? So I think we all understand how critical narrative is, and what the last 5 years has shown us is that the work, not just mine, but this really, you know, I mean, you epitomize that, Chris, right? The authors that you publish really epitomizes how we have had, for the first time, such a large number of us who collectively have some levers of control on that narrative. And this pushback is a result of that. If they weren't reading 1619 Project, if they weren't reading Stamped, if they weren't reading Between the World and Me, if they weren't reading Just Mercy and being transformed and challenged, there would be no need to ban these books. There would be no pushback. The pushback reflects the role. It reflects the power of this work and the transformative nature of it. But unfortunately, it's often felt. I think about this quote from Dr. King, where he said that those who wish us ill seem to use time more efficiently than those who wish us well. And I fear that while we were winning the narrative war, we're not winning the policy and legislative war. That a minority is holding on to power and able to execute that power, and our job is sadly sometimes just to bear witness at this point, to create that documentary record and to say, you know, when we go back and look at this moment, that they can't say they didn't know, that we can't say that we didn't know. But when 1619 came out in 2019, it seemed like we were at an inflection point. I think that inflection point went in the direction that many of us hoped it would not. And frankly, it feels like very dark times.
Yeah, but you know what's interesting is, Nikole, just to like sort of echo what I was saying about Just Mercy. It's been just so extraordinary to me because, you know, having a child who's kind of going through school during this period, he's now, for the third time, he's a junior in high school, the third time they're going through the 1619 project, and now he really gets it. Like, it took him a couple of times, but now he was talking to his teacher and he was like, you know, the reason people want to stop this kind of work from happening is because it actually explains what the country is. And there are people who don't want you to know what this country is. They don't want you to know how resources were allocated in this country unfairly. They don't want you to know that what they have might be stolen, you know, through the generations long historical crime. They don't want you to know. And I think that is definitely like the job of the writer. And just going back to this idea of a narrative struggle, if nothing else, as you just said, I think really eloquently, you know, you can't say you didn't know. Like, it's here, the work is here. And I thank all the teachers, librarians, and so forth who are putting this work onto their curricula, because there is a generation of kids who I think are being raised in a kind of different understanding of the world. So just talking about the work itself for a moment, one of the things I think both of you have, you know, amazing talent for is, you know, I mentioned to Ta-Nehisi, like, you know, why would you write about Palestine, like the subject that you'll never get a consensus of agreement about? But the same can be said is true about the origins of the American story that, Nikole, you've kind of dived into head first, or Bryan talking about the death penalty. These are difficult and polarizing subjects, but what both of you have done, I think, despite the fact that obviously huge amounts of opposition have emerged, is you've also told these stories almost as an invitation to readers. You've opened a door for readers to come into it because of the writing itself. Nikole, your introduction to 1619 project, which won the Pulitzer Prize, is still, which I got a chance to revisit because my son was going through it again. Just such a beautiful piece of writing and so inspiring, and an invitation to the reader, not something that's meant to be like a polemical salvo that turns them off. And of course, Bryan, your work is the same. How much do you think about that when you're writing? Nikole, maybe you can start us off on this, about trying not only just to tell the hard truths, but to create an invitation for people to learn them and to kind of join this narrative struggle with you.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I write both for myself, and I imagine every writer on this talk today, you write because you can't not write that thing that you feel that you have to write. You might try to walk away from it because you've got other things to do, but that is the thing that you feel you have to write. And so I write because I feel compelled to write. But I'm also, you know, the process of the researching and the trying to understand the process of self-edification means I'm also hoping that I will edify others as well. And so I'm always thinking about when I'm writing, what are the arguments that I've heard? What are the places where people haven't gotten it? What are the points of tension? What are the same tropes that I hear? What are the kind of common misperceptions? I'm thinking about those things all the time, and I'm trying to write directly to that. I think about how I read history, you know, widely, constantly, and when you turn the page and you're completely surprised by what you learn. And that feeling of discovery is what I'm also trying to bring to the reader, that, oh, you think you know this, you think you understand this thing. Well, let me draw you in, my friend, to show you, let me turn your world upside down a little bit. So I think I began my career as a newspaper reporter, but I knew I always wanted to do narrative. I understood that you have to tell people a story. You can't just hit them over the head with facts and data, that for every data point, there's a real live human being behind that data point. For every statistic you read, there's real people who are struggling, suffering, mourning. And that's a way to tell a story to help people come to these larger truths is always going to be through storytelling and through inviting people in, come sit around my campfire, my friend, right? And let me tell you a story that might be very uncomfortable, but it's a story nonetheless. So I think that's how I've always thought about it, just quickly. I didn't intend to open that essay with my dad and the flag. And in fact, I didn't intend to write about my dad at all. And as I was really struggling with that essay, and I was constantly thinking about my dad as I was trying to understand why did Black people in general, love this country, fight for this country, that quest was being guided by trying to understand my father. So even though I wasn't intending to write about him, I just kept thinking about him. And so I tucked him all the way at the end, right? I wrote the whole essay, and then I finally at the end said, this is what my dad was talking about. And my editor, Jake, says, I really think you should start the piece with your dad. And I was really opposed to that. But he made an argument, and it was true, right? Is that you disarm people with that story. And because no matter what your race is, if you're an American, you feel a certain way about that flag. And especially if you are, I won't say if you're Black or white, right? Like so many Black folks came up to me and said, oh my God, I felt the same way. I didn't understand why my dad joined the Army. I didn't understand their service. I didn't understand any of that. I didn't feel like I could claim it, and now I do. And so many white Americans would say, they grow up with some patriotism. I mean, like I know, if you're Black and you see a lot of American flags in the neighborhood, you're like, I got to get the hell up out of here because this is not a neighborhood for me, right? Like the flag has not been something we as Black people have felt we could claim. And so it allowed to make this connection kind of across humanity just by opening with that anecdote of this very important symbol. So I think I'm always trying to find ways to write for the broadest audience as possible, but at the same time, and Bryan, you did this obviously in Just Mercy, not watering it down, not turning away from the brutality and the injustice, but trying to help us connect to what we allow to be done in our names at the most base human level.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Just one other thing I'm just going to add quickly is that, of the writers who we're talking to tonight, Ta-Nehisi, to you and Bryan and Ibram, I've never seen 4 writers who were more concerned with getting their books factually, like every single fact and detail correct. So not only are you trying to write this inviting narrative that brings people in, but you are making sure that it is absolutely, like, unimpeachably correct, because we know one mistake is all it takes.
Exactly.
One mistake, and they will. Meanwhile, there's whatever. Don't get me started. And Bryan, just to turn that question to you for a moment, that question of your work as an invitation, that also extends to 3-dimensional work that you've kind of created in the world with your monument project in Montgomery that Nikole mentioned. How is it that you're able to take such a hard subject and make it such an invitation for readers?
Yeah, well, for me, I think it's, what helped me was being sort of an advocate, continuing to be an advocate for people who are poor and vulnerable, people who are condemned. As a lawyer living in Alabama, going into courts that are really hostile to the people I represent, hostile to a lot of the things that I think are important. I didn't have the option to just talk for myself in that space. I had to persuade, I had to find a way to get, because otherwise my clients would literally be killed and the people I was trying to help would be continually oppressed. And so thinking about, and I think it's exactly what Nikole said, it's that stories allow everyone a chance to participate. You can get involved, and that's, I think, the power of narrative. We've seen a lot of movement on a lot of issues in this country over the last 50 years. I think about what Mothers Against Drunk Driving did in the 1970s and 80s, when they began elevating human stories in response to the crisis of people driving while intoxicated. And legislators were not paying any attention to that. We did not have very strong responses to people who would get in a car intoxicated and do harm to other people. But it was these mothers who told the story of their children that shifted the narrative about that offense. And every law in every state has shifted. And now we have a much lower tolerance for that phenomenon than we did before those narratives took hold. And so I do believe that is the challenge we face in this country. And why I was so excited when Nikole asked me to participate in 1619 is that I do think it begins with retelling the origin story. Because if we don't get that reshaped, we're going to continue to keep trying to treat these symptoms that never get to the real illness. And for me, it really is kind of rooted in what I inherited from, Rosa Parks and Joanne Robinson and Dr. King and John Lewis, which was this activism. They weren't just trying to liberate Black people. They weren't just trying to help Black people have rights. They wanted the whole community to get to a better place. And I give a lot of talks, and our sites are focused on slavery and lynching and segregation. And I think sometimes when people hear me talk, or they hear the subject, they think I want to punish America for slavery, lynching, and segregation. And I have to keep emphasizing, I have no interest in punishment. I don't think you get to a healthy society. I don't think you advance justice. I don't think you promote freedom by focusing on punishment. I think you have to focus on liberation. You have to focus on the things that allow all of us to get to a better place. And I think that's the beautiful opportunity that we get to have. And I loved Nikole's story about her father, and Ibram and Ta-Nehisi do this as well. And I think that's one of the things that inspires me, even in this moment of real controversy and conflict. They are banning books, they are pushing back. But I do feel like what Ta-Nehisi said, during enslavement, abolitionist literature was absolutely prohibited in the American South. Enslaved people were forbidden by law to learn how to read. They understood the power of these ideas. People don't appreciate that many formerly enslaved people were writing narratives that were so powerful, transformative. And the same thing happened in post-Reconstruction. There was an effort to kind of limit educational opportunities for Black people. That's why segregation was so insistent and pernicious. They didn't want Black people. I grew up in a community where none of the adults had high school degrees because there were no high schools for Black people in our community. And so it is only because of the narrative work of these amazing authors that you're now seeing this counter narrative trying to push back. And I just think it's important to inhabit the spirit of our foreparents. And I find myself talking more and more about my enslaved great-grandparents than I ever did throughout most of my career. I went to Harvard Law School, and on the first day of law school, they asked the students in my little group, why are you in law school? And everybody talked about how they were the son or the daughter or the nephew or the niece or the grandchild of a lawyer. And the more they talked, the more diminished I felt. And by the time they got to me, I felt so unprepared. And I realized in that moment that not only was I not related to a lawyer, on my first day of law school at Harvard, I realized I'd never even met a lawyer. So I didn't answer the question honestly. I just told a joke. And I called my mom after and I said, Mom, I don't think I belong here. My mother said, what is wrong with you? You belong anywhere you go. You're the smartest person in the world. You can do anything you want to do. My mother gave me that talk. And then she said, now you need to go back and tell those kids why you're really in law school. And I hung up. I felt better, but I knew I couldn't organize that group of kids. That would be just too awkward. But 2 weeks later, I was thinking, man, I'm still feeling off. And I pulled these group of kids together, students together. And I said, I didn't talk honestly on my first day, and I need to tell you why I'm in Harvard Law School. And what I told them is, I said, I'm in law school because my great-grandfather was enslaved in Caroline County, Virginia. And even though there were anti-literacy laws that would have cost him his life if he learned to read, even though they could have sold him or killed him for learning to read, my great-grandfather had a hope for freedom so great, he learned to read. He risked his life to read. And after emancipation, my grandmother told me that my great-grandfather would stand on the porch of their home once a week and read the newspaper to formerly enslaved people who didn't know how to read. And she loved the power he had just because he could read. And my grandmother worked as a domestic her whole life. She lived until her 90s, but my grandmother was a reader She had 10 children. She insisted that all of her children be readers. I'd go visit my grandmother, and sometimes she'd stand on the porch with a stack of books, and she'd make you read from the book before she would let you inside. She was very strategic. She'd say, "What do you want for dessert, Bryan?" I'd come up with something crazy. She'd go make it. It smelled so good. I'd go run to the kitchen, and she'd be standing there with those books, and I knew I'd have to read to get that dessert. And I grew up in this poor, racially segregated community. Most of the people had outhouses. There were a lot of people. You didn't see much hope outside our door. People got on the buses to go to the poultry plants. As I said, none of the adults had high school degrees. But when I was a little boy, 9 and 10, my mother went into debt and bought us the World Book Encyclopedia. She wanted to arm us narratively to confront the things that we would have to confront. And I didn't understand it as a 10-year-old because, you know, Christmas comes along, your friends are like, well, I got a basketball for Christmas, I got a bicycle, I got a baseball. And I'd have to say, well, I got volume G of the World Book Encyclopedia. But when I got to law school, I realized I was there because of the hopes and the dreams and the narrative power of my enslaved great-grandparents, my grandparents that fled lynching and segregation, my parents who had to deal with all of that. And that's the beauty of this moment, is that we are more than capable to confront this banning of books. We are more than capable to navigate around these misguided laws because we have seen it done by people who did so much more with so much less. And that's why I feel like we do have to meet this moment courageously, and we cannot be turned around by the ignorance and the shouting and the efforts to try to restrain. I'm honored that they're trying to keep us from doing the things that we're trying to do. It just tells me, as Ta-Nehisi said, that we're saying the things that need to be said.
Absolutely.
So well put. You know, Nikole said that, you know, reading Just Mercy, she cried on an airplane. So I remember very distinctly reading a manuscript page printed out on the subway of one of the chapters. And this rarely happens to me when I'm working, but just breaking down crying. And then again, just this year when I went down to the museum in Montgomery, and I just encourage everyone to go there because Bryan has created narratives in so many different ways, in book form, in film, and in these monuments in Alabama, that I just had to like take a moment because I was so deeply moved by the story you're telling there as well. And just speaking of stories in different forms, and unfortunately, once again, we're running out of time. So Nikole, one of the things that you've done, aside from obviously your work as a writer and a journalist, is that you've also begun sort of building various kinds of institutions, programs to kind of pay it forward, creating a new generation of storytellers. And can you just tell us a little bit of some of those things? Because I think that's such a crucial part of the sort of fight against banning and the cultivation of stories, is that we cultivate others as well.
Absolutely. I think I was inspired in much the way that Bryan was inspired, is when you don't come from much and you've been given a lot and you've been able to achieve a lot. I just feel like we owe a debt to our larger community, and that it can't just be about your own personal success or accolades if you're not using those to try to transform the lives of others. So I co-founded the Ida B. Wells Society for Investigative Reporter about 7 years ago now, and we train other Black journalists to become investigative reporting in the tradition of Ida B. Wells, and understanding that if you don't have people of color holding power accountable, our communities will continue to be taken advantage of and abused. And during the pandemic, I founded the 1619 Freedom School in my hometown, Waterloo, Iowa. It's a free after-school literacy program that teaches children who are at least 2 grades behind in reading. We teach them literacy through Black history. And really in that tradition of understanding that the quest for literacy, the quest for knowledge, the quest to be able to read and to learn has been the enduring quest of Black people since we landed in this country. And also there were efforts to ban 1619 Project in my home state, as well as the state did pass one of those divisive concept laws. So our students literally were not able to get their history in their schools. And I wanted to ensure that they were able to get that. And then I went to Howard and founded the Center for Journalism and Democracy there. And we work both to try to push the field of journalism away from the stance of neutrality and false balance that I think is abdicating our duty in this political moment, but also to provide resources and train the next generations of historically informed investigative reporters across the diaspora of HBCUs. So I'm like Bryan, I have 12 jobs. And of course, the last thing, I'm founding a project in Brooklyn that is going to be hoping to evoke the literary salons of the Harlem Renaissance, but in Brooklyn. And I hope people will come and support that when it opens sometime next year. But it just really is my great blessing to be able to have vision and bring resources to our larger community, because we will continue to create the narrative for our mutual liberation, no matter what people want to do and how people want to stop us. That's what we are called to do, and that's what we'll continue to do.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's a great place for us to end. Thank you, Nikole and Bryan, again, two of my heroes. And what's exciting is you're both, at least in theory, writing new books. So we can't wait. You both happen.
Heavy on the theory part, but it's okay.
But always such an inspiring pleasure to be in conversation with you both. And now I'm going to turn it back over to our host.
Thank you, Chris. I don't know how you all feeling, but I'm so inspired and moved and filled in this moment. I feel so full. The conversation was so rich. It was interesting as Nikole was sharing. I was thinking about a story when I was doing work in Hurricane Katrina, right after Hurricane Katrina, and there were some young men who literally had been able to save a group of people out of one of the apartment buildings. And I'll never forget this story about the flag. He said that they had been standing up there for hours. And then one of them had the idea to go swim in the building and get the flag. And so he swam in the building, literally risked his life, and went to get the flag. And he came up, and when he came up, they waved the flag. And when they waved the flag, that they got help immediately. And so I asked him, I said, well, what made you do that? He said, well, what we knew is we knew that white folks cared about that flag, but they didn't care about us. And so it's always struck me in terms of how people respond differently to symbols and how we respond to the flag. But and as we go forward, I want to go forward to get us on track because we're running out of time. But it's really important for us to recognize that kind of in this moment, that who's really impacted our children and young people are impacted by when we're talking about banned books. And who says that what history that they can have access to. We have to fight and stand in that space, but it has a tremendous impact on our children and students and young leaders. And so with that, I want to bring up in conversation with me, I want to ask Nia Batra if you can join. Who's going to join me for a conversation? Hi, Nia.
Hey.
Hey, it's great to see you. Nia is a member of the Georgia Youth and Justice Coalition, and she's a future student member of her school board. Nia, what I want to know is if you can tell people a little bit about yourself, and then I'm going to get right into our questions because I want to hear from you.
Oh, Nia. All right, hello everyone. I know that the weather is a little bit treacherous, so I hope y'all can see.
We can. It may be if the bandwidth isn't. What we may need to do is, if it go, just try now, and if not, go off camera. Can you hear me?
Okay. All right. Yes, I can.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you, tell us a little bit about who you are, and I do want to just go on and just ask you, how has the banned books? How has that impacted you as a leader?
Yeah, okay. So I'm Nia. I'm a junior in high school. I do consider myself a poet, a writer. I work with the Georgia Youth Justice Coalition. So I do I'm a digital leader, and so what that means is I help run our socials, and I just want to really transform, there's a lot of youth energy in this movement, and I want to harness that and put it into action. So I just see myself as like a way to showcase like our stories, our successes, and get people moving. And so there are a couple of books that I wanted to talk about. So Ruby Fruit Drunkle by Rita Mae Brown is this like pioneer lesbian book I read. And it has a lot of edgier themes, like there are some interracial relations. It's a book from the 70s. And it was really important to me to read because I'm queer. And it's about this young queer girl like exploring the world and navigating her identity. Um, I read Stamped by Dr. Kendi. I was in the 7th grade. It was over the pandemic. It was over virtual. And I was supposed to give the book back to the school, and I didn't. I kept it for a long, long time. And the way that book shaped me was, like I had never really thought about anti-racism as a verb. I kind of thought like, okay, I'm not racist. Like I can keep my hands off of that. But now I see like I have a responsibility as a brown person to like shoulder that burden of slavery, of racism, and to be aware of that and conscious when I'm like interacting with the world. Um, and to really see that as a verb, like it's my role to disrupt that system, and that's burden is not just on Black people. Um, so I'm from Decatur, and Decatur is a really cool place because I was always nurtured. That spirit in me always nurtured. So my teachers have taught me to question a lot of things, and I haven't been as censored, but I have this friend who lives in Cobb County. And if you guys are not familiar with Cobb County, lot of BS happening there on the behalf of like the majority of the board. I know that Miss Katie Rinderly couldn't speak today. But she was a teacher in Cobb County, and she read this book called My Shadow is Purple. And it's about it's so innocent, but it has non-binary themes. She read it to her kids. She got fired. So since then, me and my organization have been working to go to these board meetings uh, and speak up on the behalf of students. So my friend that goes there, she's Black. Um, she told me that in her senior year of high school, she didn't read a single book in her lit class because all of the ones that they were supposed to be taught were banned. Um, and it just like it's that contrast of like being in Decatur, listening to Cobb, like it's I am so privileged to be able to like hear these stories and be so educated, but I know that like she feels like she's really missed out on that because it's not just about books. Like we keep saying, it's about, banning a book means you're banning that kid. Censorship is like that tool of fascism. It's like saying like you don't belong. And it's a way to make us like voiceless. And like even if we look back to, like the civil rights movement and all of those gains, like there were the policy wins and the legislative wins that like Dr. King worked on and all of that. But like when Outkast hit the global stage in the 90s and the 2000s, like that's when that cultural shift of like it's okay for Black people to dominate like music and culture. It's okay for a place like Atlanta to exist in the South where like Black people are pioneers and leaders. That's really important. So storytelling is resistance, and book banning like undermines all of that.
Nia, you said Outkast. I just want you to know you are someone after my heart. Like I am a big Outkast fan. And so you're absolutely right. I want like the people that are listening, what is it that you think that they can do in this space of having banned books? What is it that we can do? Oh, did I lose you, Nia? I am sorry. Let me see if Nia will join us back. One, I think your clarity, your brilliance, and just literally the work that you are doing with the school board. There is a storm, y'all. We're working virtually, but there is a storm that is happening outside, and so I'm not sure if that has actually impacted Nia. Nia would love to join back. If you join back, let me know. If not, I absolutely understand. I think I got you again.
Yeah.
Okay. So last question. What should we do? What do you think we should do?
All right. Yeah, that's a loaded question. I did have to shout out Outcasts because I'm from Decatur. I know my roots. So okay. So first of all, like I just want to talk about how like hard of a space it is to like go in as young people, as brown people, to go into these spaces dominated by like white men, who don't respect you at all, and you have to like shake their hand and be like, hey, like I'm just trying to make sure we can understand each other. So, last year during legislative session, there was this bill, HB 390, and it was about defunding the American Library Association. And I went to go testify. I didn't end up getting to testify because these systems are so bad at like letting anyone talk ever. But there's a senator in there who didn't understand anything at all, and he was talking about like how he was talking about divisive concepts, and he was saying things like, well, you know, I read the Hardy Boys, like the kids can just read the Hardy Boys. Now, if you actually read the Hardy Boys, like there's racism, there's sexism, there's misogyny, like it's all of these things, and it's like, what is truly a divisive concept? It's not it's just what these people care about. It doesn't involve like queer people. So like racism is okay, but like, you know, like my identity can't be in there. And so you know, there are these forces like Moms for Liberty, who is like this supposed like group of parents that are really passionate, but they have like all this money behind them. And they really go into these school board meetings and they cause this big ruckus when they're like, you know, kids ending up in prison. Like it's a distractor, it's a scapegoat. They're just trying to distract you from like actual progress. But then you then can go to your own school board meeting and make sure that like this kind of same stuff isn't happening. So you can go testify if a book is getting banned. You can vote. So you know, I shake hands with like awful senators, but one person who I didn't get to shake hands with ever was John Lewis, which I really regret, and I really wish I gotten a chance to meet him. But one of his last calls was vote. You have to vote. Voting is insured. It's an insured tool in this democracy. And there's no way to like disrupt, like if you can't use your power to vote, like what are you doing? You can't change the system at all. So I'm 16, I'm too young to vote, but I am like canvassing literally every weekend in like swing counties. I'm just making sure that people are going out and voting, because it's like these conversations with real people on the ground, telling them their vote matters. Marcellus Williams, he wouldn't be dead if like that Supreme Court had different people on it. That happens by voting. That's how we disrupt that system. So just be loud, be vigilant, go to your school board, go vote. And just like we keep having this conversation, like storytelling, writing, that's activism. That's how we disrupt these narratives and like put our own narratives out. So yeah. And then I wanted to talk about a little bit about being on my own school board. So in a place like Cobb County, that is totally unprecedented. Where, you know, they intimidate their students, they don't listen to their students, there are all these restrictions on who can speak. For me, I am 16 years old. Next year I will be sitting on the school board, and I will be able to advise people directly. And like in Decatur, there's this disparity where like at the 3rd grade, Black kids aren't at reading level, white kids are. That is a big problem because knowledge is currency. When like there's this narrative of like if you aren't qualified to talk, you shouldn't talk. And that gap should close. So that is like a big duty for me. So all of those things work in tandem. Censorship, voting, representation. It's all about representation. So the louder we are, the more we'll win.
One, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for having this discussion, this conversation with me. And then you are literally a baddie. Like you are amazing. You are amazing. The work that you're doing, the way that you're sharing your perspective and your truth. So thank you so much for your work, Nia. Thank you for standing in this space. Thank you for fighting back, because I agree with you. When we stand in the space, what we have shown is that we create the space. We create an expansive space. So thank you. And as we get ready to come to the close of the program, I don't know about y'all, but I feel like I've been listening to the justice. I've had an inside to listen to the Justice League of social justice authors. That's what I feel like. I feel like have been sitting at the throne of brilliance. I feel like I have borne witness to not just the work that is happening, but the passion. The reason why we celebrate is because the reason why we write, that we are affirming our humanity, that ultimately part of the biggest issue around racism is really racism seeks to literally dehumanize people. And so in this space, that what we're saying through our words, through our writing, that we're literally embracing, we're amplifying, we're honoring, we're celebrating our humanity. And that's what this program was about. I'm going to ask my sister, Elizabeth Mendez-Berry, to actually join me because we've got work to do. Listen, I am a host tonight, but listen, be real clear. I am an activist and an organizer and a creative. And so I think it's really important for us to recognize something that Nikole said that I just wanted to mention real quickly, because I've been doing a lot of thinking about it. And I saw it in the chat. I saw around this dark night, and we can leave thinking about banned books in a particular kind of way. My grandmother used to have this phrase that she used to say. She was a woman of faith, and she would say, what the devil meant for harm, God will use for your good. And so we have to also see this as an opening. This is an opening for us to really embrace and recommit ourselves to our story and understand that there's strength in our story. And when we align that with spirit, the spirit to change, the spirit to hold people accountable, the spirit to correct, that all the spirit of love, that all those things literally actually they've got to give way. They've got to give way to our spirit. And then the other thing that I would say, Elizabeth, and you and I have talked about this. I saw a lot of people talk about this is a dark night. I heard Nikole talk, raises at this moment. There's one perspective of looking at this moment as a dark night, but I think the truth of the matter is it is in the darkness that we see the stars, that the stars are always out, all 24 hours a day, but it's in the darkness that we see the stars. So those of us, we who believe in freedom and cannot rest, that this is our moment. This is our moment to literally be able to flex. This is our moment to push back. This is our moment to radically reimagine and reshape how we go forward. And so, Elizabeth, I just want to listen, what are we going to tell the people to do?
So first of all, I just want to salute LaTosha Brown. If we were physically together, I know we would be levitating together because of you and because of your connection through this conversation, because of your spirit, because of your illumination, right? So I'm so grateful to you. And I think that, part of the reason that we wanted to be together was because in this moment, after there's been opportunity to hear from a teacher, Katie, who unfortunately wasn't able to make it, hearing from this incredible group of authors, hearing about how you actually write the stories that right the wrongs, that face the history without fear, that we could then be together in fellowship, right? And so we're not together, but I really want to encourage you all to listen to Nia, to listen to LaTosha, to listen to all of our authors tonight, and go check out our partners. I know I put it in the chat. I want to make sure that you all have an opportunity. There was going to be tables outside. There were going to be opportunities to connect, all that good stuff. So we're going to do it virtually. I know that you all have felt this. I know that I have shed tears tonight. I know how grateful I am for you, LaTosha, and for all of our authors. I also just let me pass it back to you. And then I also want to say a couple more thank yous. But LaTosha, what would you add to that?
So, I think a couple of things. I think one, I think it's really important for us to recognize in this moment that if we're alive in this moment, that's because we're supposed to be alive right now. If we're in this conversation, we're being called to this conversation, right? If we are literally feeling something, that's because we're supposed to feel. And that literally is our direction. That's our breadcrumbs to action. And so literally what we see every single day, that the work that we do throughout the South, that you would be amazed at just how a small group of people can go and shift the whole trajectory of a school board meeting, just to say no, to say we're not doing this, that you would be amazed at the numbers that when we're standing together in coalition, how we can actually transform and create the kind of world that we desire, that we deserve. And so in this space, what I would say, I think it's really important for us to really, this is not the moment for us to be quiet. This is the moment, even as I think about, even as I think about kind of when we're talking about these stars, this is the moment that for our stars to shine, that it is such a moment as this. And so there's an interesting thing, as I was looking around stars, and I shared this with Elizabeth, I was looking at the North Star, and I thought the North Star was, I was researching the North Star, I thought it was the brightest star in the sky. It's not the brightest star in the sky. The North Star literally is the most consistent and most dependable, right? And so it's always there. That's why people like Harriet Tubman could follow the North Star for freedom. But I also literally went down this rabbit hole and found out what was a dead star. There's some stars that we're looking at in the sky right now that literally all we're seeing is the residue of their former glory days. Those stars have burned out years ago, and we're only seeing the residue of their former glory days. That's where I think we are right now. Those who seek to ban books, literally, they are those stars that they have literally gone far beyond their time, that they're new stars that are born every day, and that we will create and illuminate the world that we want. And so we want to ask you all to actually get involved, get engaged. But in organizations, there are organizations throughout the state of Georgia. I know that ACLU and some others that have been doing a lot of work around banned books. We're going to ask you to really be able to, we've got to support authors, local authors that are doing this work, that our partnership organizations that you see in the list, that literally be able to volunteer with them or contribute something to them. Young people like Nia, who are actually leading on the front lines of this work, that we're supporting them and we're girding them up. This is a moment for us. This is not just about books. This is about our stories. This is about the canon of our life. This is books gives us the opportunity to actually put form to spirit. And so I will say, this is the moment, y'all, that we got to act. We got to do something. Let's do the work. We can do it. We can celebrate. We have always. We who believe in freedom cannot rest, cannot rest. Oh, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Elizabeth, thank you so much, you and Chris and all the brilliance that we've shared. I really wish we were together so we could hug, but this is a moment. This is a really special moment for us to really lean into, to recommit ourselves that no, this is not going to happen on our watch. We're literally, those of us that believe in freedom will not, cannot, shall not rest until it comes.
Thank you so, so much, LaTosha. I'm just going to say a couple more thank yous, and then we can call all of our authors out. I just wanted to, and one thing I want to say about Ta-Nehisi's new book, he has this moment where he talks about what the intimacy between the reader and the writer, and the alchemy that happens within when you read a book that opens you. And that is part of the story, right? And when you connect that intimate experience with a writer like the people we've heard from tonight, with community, with action, with possibility, I think you get the sound that LaTosha just shared, the harmony. I just want to quickly mention our team. So many people worked so hard to make this possible. I know I'm going to miss some people, but I just wanted to say quickly, huge thanks to Kate. Huge thanks to Nikole, huge thanks to Raga, to Evita, to Chris, to everybody who's been, Carla, Lulu, gosh, I know I'm forgetting a couple people, but I want to thank all of you. I want to thank our partners who we listed before, who are on the website, and really encourage you to check out Black Voters Matter. And hopefully LaTosha Brown is going to have a book coming out one of these days. So we call our authors onto the screen right now for a final bow, virtual bow. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you.
We are the light bearers.
Thank you, Dr. Kendi. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Nia. Thank you, LaTosha. Standing ovation from the sofa. Good night, everybody.
Good night.